I'm getting a real sense that you're really an open government type guy.
I think that's critical, yeah, especially now. One of the things we found is that regardless of party, a lot of people are frustrated that the government is not open to them, it's not responsive to them. And here in this little corner of the government that actually has a lot of influence and a lot of impact, we have this great opportunity to just open the doors. And I just can't think of any reason not to.
Let me ask, hang on just a second, I lost my train of thought here. One of the things I know that is a problem at times, and I think this is covered by the Treasurer's Office, is disbursements of different payments, like seated disbursements. I can't think of any of the others off the top of my head, but payments to the local government depends on payments to schools. Any thoughts on that?
I know that there have been some issues with that in the last year. I'm thinking in particular one of the Northwest Indiana communities, it might have been Gary, was basically just got the wrong information. They got more money than they were supposed to, didn't know it, spent it, and then were told, wait, sorry, we take it back. But to be honest, that's not part of the Treasurer's Office as much as the Auditor's Office. One way to think about the division of labor is that the Treasurer looks after the money, the legislature decides what to do with it, and then the Auditor cuts the check. And so that's something that actually somebody else on my ticket, Sam Locke, who's running for state auditor, has been very vocal and articulate about is some of the ways that we can improve those kinds of processes. And I won't step on him because I know he has a much more thoughtful response than I do. I do know there have been some issues that need to be looked at.
Let me ask you about a state issue that again, I'm not sure where the boundaries are, but I think it would affect you somewhat as a treasurer. Property tax caps. It's on the ballot for to be written into possibly the Constitution. Where do you weigh in on that issue?
I'm uncomfortable with anything that dictates to local communities how they can handle revenue. So I've met a lot of municipal governments where folks are very nervous about the impact this is going to have on their communities. As treasurer, I wouldn't have any authority over taxing decisions, though. The best thing I can do about keeping taxes low as treasurer is to make sure the money's looked after well and that it's getting a good return. If we never lose money in a bad investment, then we're going to have higher balances to work with, and that means that whatever we decide the tax level has to be, we can get the same or better services for it. Or, if you want to think about it the other side, for a given level of services, the better the treasurer is at his job, the lower the taxes are going to be.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to talk about? Anything you had in mind?
I think today is the day when campaigns release their finance numbers, and everybody puts their cards on the table for the last quarter. And it's highlighted something I think is really important in this race, and is very important certainly to my campaign. And that is that I think we need to get special interest money out of the treasurer's race. Right now, there are almost no rules constraining the ability of, say, Wall Street banks to pump large sums of money into state treasurer's campaign. And having looked at my own finances and seen what's happening in my opponent's race, I've noticed that thousands of dollars are flowing in from some of the biggest banks in the country in order to defeat me. It's not just that they're trying to defeat me that I'm bothered by this, but very early on in this campaign, I made a decision that I wasn't going to accept any money from a bank that could be doing business with the state treasurer's office. I think it creates a conflict of interest. It creates an appearance, at the very least, that can smell like pay to play. It's not good for the state. And I don't think it's good for the banks either. Who wants to be the one bank that didn't contribute if 4 or 5 banks are competing to get a favorable decision from the state treasurer's office? And so early on in this campaign, I announced that I wouldn't take that money, no corporate money from banks, no PAC money from banks, and somebody who works at a bank, we're going to hold ourselves to a limit that's lower than the official limit for what they want to give to my campaign. And I invited the incumbent treasurer to join me in that. He has not responded. We've been waiting for months, and it's pretty clear that he's going to continue to take money from banks that do business with his office, and from banks that have received bailouts too, which is puzzling because he's been very vocal against bailouts but doesn't seem to mind taking money from those banks. I think we have a real opportunity to clean this up by tying both candidates' hands. So instead of me having to make a decision, can my campaign survive my tying one arm behind my back and not taking this kind of money? Let's not make that be a decision that any candidate has to face, and not put any bank in the position of saying, gee, did we give enough? Let's just take it off the table. So if I get elected, I'm going to work with the legislature to try to write it out of possibility that a bank that could be doing business directly with the state treasurer's office, where the state treasurer is just picking and choosing what banks to put the state's money in, can't be giving money to his campaign. I just think that's a no-brainer. It goes hand in hand with open government, and I think it'll get us a more responsive government because it takes campaign contributions off the table as one of the factors in decision making. And that's great because there are a lot of other things we should be thinking about when we're choosing who the state ought to bank with. The state treasurer can just decide what banks get the state's money. And I've seen a lot of it flowing to banks that are not even headquartered in Indiana, which means those dollars are much less likely to flow in our communities and create jobs. And I also think we need to consider how a bank has been treating customers. So in fact, I'm going to set up an 800 number in my office so that if you're having an issue with your bank, I'd like to know about it. I'm not a regulator. I'm not running to be a regulator. That's not the role of the office. But the office is a very big customer, and that means there's a certain amount of power. And so if I start to notice a pattern out there that a bunch of folks are calling in saying ABC Bank has been offering deceitful products or tricking me with interest rates or concealed overdraft fees or whatever it is, I'm pretty sure that if I call the vice president of that bank and remind them of our state deposits, I'm going to get that call returned. And I'm going to be in a position to actually move the needle in terms of the way that bank treats people. It's one of those things that I see as a no-brainer, but because we haven't had fresh legs in the office for a while, I think it's an opportunity we've missed.
Another opportunity, I think it was yourself that I read on your website, maybe one of the press releases that we talked about, the revolving door, looking at some of the ethical issues that are out there as well.
Yeah, in the same way that you see a lot of legislators who wind up as lobbyists and people kind of coming and going, I think we ought to be careful about the possibility of people walking straight out of the treasurer's office and straight into an office that wants to get some kind of gain out of the treasurer's office. And so I think we need to put a freeze on that kind of revolving door pattern. Again, these are things that a lot of states are doing. Even a state, I again point to Illinois, which has a reputation for being behind the curve on ethics. They make sure that banks can't be contributing in large amounts to state races where they have direct financial interests like that. And I think it's something that you don't have to be Democrat or Republican to think is a good idea.
Sure. Anything else?
Gosh, we've covered a lot of this stuff I think is really important. I could go into mind-numbing detail on what I think about some of the bonds in our portfolio and what we ought to do. But the bottom line is we need to keep this money safer. Get it out of the junk bonds, get it out of some of these mortgage-backed securities, get it into safe Indiana businesses, your kind of classic AAA investments that you know are going to be solid. And once you know it's safe, put it to work. Figure out how to use it to create jobs. And I hope that citizens this year will be especially attentive to how people say they're going to create jobs. It's easy for somebody like me, for anybody running for office, to say we're for jobs. That's pretty much a no-brainer if you're a politician. But when somebody says that, I think it's important that they be asked how. And so I've been determined to be the most substantive and specific candidate in this race, offering specific idea after idea on what to do with that money that would create jobs. And I think in that way, this office that a lot of folks don't even know is there can be at least part of the solution to getting us out of the economic mess.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll end. Pete, we thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Wish you well in November.
Appreciate that.